Right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm a minute late, something I don't like being, but there we go. So welcome to this evening's planning meeting. My name's Councillor White, John White, and on my left is the Vice Chairman acting tonight, Councillor Baker. The other councillors who are members of the committee are sitting on the tables, side tables, and they will be the ones, when I can stop them talking, who will deliberate on tonight's business. On my left and right are the TDC officers, including the Head of Planning and the committee solicitor. This is a formal committee meeting, and it's important that the councillors can hear all the presentations and the debate, and therefore I'm sure you won't interrupt the speakers. Order of business tonight. It's the first thing will be an officer's presentation on the application. Once that's complete, we shall have public speaking. If anybody has indicated that they wish to speak, and I've just done a check, there aren't many speakers, then if there's any further comments from the officers, and then the committee members will ask questions, debate, and finally vote on the application. I should add that tonight's meeting is being recorded by the council. And so we go straight to the agenda with apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. We have one apology from Councillor Heaney.
Right, thank you very much. And no substitution for her. Now, last week we took the minutes of the previous meeting, so there's no minutes to consider tonight. To declarations of interest for any councillors, they're all invited to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests or personal interests. So, councillors, yes, Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm predetermined with regard to agenda items A1 and A2, and while they are discussed, I will be leaving the room. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No further declarations? Right, in that case, we move straight to item A1, which is, excuse me, it is an application for land to the south of Long Road and the west of Clacton Road, Mistley. It's planning application 17/01537, and this is still at this stage an outline. Right, straight to the officer.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening. I'll talk you through, first of all, the history to this, because I think it's important. The application, as has been said, is in outline form, and it's a variation of what are termed the parameter plans. Which the parameter plans are basically the plans that give an overview of the site. And if we roll through to those, first of all, the application site outline, which you'll be familiar with from previous applications, and then an aerial. Just so we know where we are, Long Road, Clacton Road, in due course we'll be going through the aspects of the layout, which include where the entrances are to the site and where one of which is to be relocated, and also where the employment area is to be relocated, and that's going in the bottom southeast corner around here. The typical long-range views of the site. There's not much to see. It's just corn, I believe, cornfields. Limited vegetation on the Long Road side, although on the north side of the road, that's quite heavily hedged. That's the bottom southwest corner, and here we have the original master plan that was approved in outline form. You can see where the road on the access is on the Long Road, the access on the Clacton Road, and in the bottom left-hand or southwest corner, the employment area. As you can tell from this, quite a lot of green area, quite a lot of shown as swales, that's ponding, leisure routes through the green areas. This diagram gives an indication of the height of development. Again, this was what was approved at outline. And it shows a central area, a core central area rising to 2.5 stories. That's 3 stories, effectively. But 2 stories or 2.5 stories to eaves. One area of lower rise around here. And on this layout, the employment area is, as I mentioned before, in the southwest corner. This gives an indication of landscaping, quite a heavy landscape content, giving overall a very low density form of development. This is the first of 3 parameter plans that came in as an application, and it was recommended by officers at the time, but then subsequently refused at committee. You'll see the main difference by this stage. They'd come in with a slightly revised location around here for the Clacton Road, access slightly higher at the north. The employment area relocated from the southwest to the southeast, and probably noticeably less green space, particularly around the southern and western boundaries of the site, and indeed on the eastern side. You can see that's quite pinched up there. Following on from that, same sort of developed area, but this time showing the intended story heights. On this plan, it's showing 2.5 stories across the entire site. So you can see there was a fundamental difference between this layout and the approved outline. And finally, on the refused version, the green infrastructure. Moving on to the current application, we have the illustrative master plan. You can see, in principle, they've maintained a landscaping around a buffer zone, landscaping around the perimeter of the site, and some substantial green areas, green open space. Sorry, can everybody hear me? Is this... yeah? Okay, and then the first of, again, 3 of the revised parameter plans. Now, these are the ones that are before you to determine. The landscape plan, first of all, showing quite a high proportion still, as per the outline. And there's not a great deal of difference between this and the original outline, to our minds anyway. Swales to deal with on the east side to deal with the water runoff and address the sud situation, and a pond area on the north side. That's quite high ground on the north side, so that is more of an amenity feature than anything to do with drainage. This shows the building heights. In the centre, the 2.5 story, which is around a central cluster, and then tailing off to between 1 to 2 stories outside of that. The intention being, on my understanding, that this would reduce significantly, probably around the southern edges, where you'd expect a sort of 1.5 story scale of high scale to feature. And that in turn addresses the open land, the open countryside that that falls down to the south of that boundary. So that sums up the application. The current one reverts fairly closely to the original approved outline. Certainly around most of the boundaries, there's possibly a little bit more erosion of green space here. But I think what needs to be borne in mind is the actual overall density of development. There's a significant amount of green space in comparison to what the local plan requires, well in excess of 10%. And beyond that, the fundamental differences relate to the relocation of the Clacton Road access and the relocation of the employment area. That sums up this particular application. So over to the floor.
Right. Thank you very much. We'll go now to any of the public speaking. I don't have anybody from the member of the public either for or against, and nobody from the parish, but I have both ward members, Councillor Guglielmi and Councillor Colley. If they like to sort out who's coming first, they might... Right, thank you very much, sir. You know the rules well once you've got your microphone live. That's it.
Thank you, Chairman. Members of the committee, these first two applications on the agenda are both intrinsically linked, therefore I will speak briefly, very briefly, to oppose them both. The site is one of the highest locations in the parish of Mistley, and therefore in a prominent position within the community. Any increase in proposed dwelling heights would therefore be additionally and unnecessarily intrusive. In addition, this site is the last green gap between the villages of Lawford and the villages of Mistley. The applicant has secured planning consent for 300 homes in spite of local public and councillor objection. The original proposed layout of the site sought to mitigate some of the loss of green gap and visual benefits by designing as much open and recreational space to the outlying areas of the development as possible. This application now seeks to redesign and reduce that open space by increasing the development land. This will result in visual as well as physical coalescence of the two parishes, contributing to a loss of amenity and a poorer visual aspect. I realise that the remaining open space available still exceeds the minimum requirement in terms of percentages. However, this is a special site requiring any remaining vestiges of protection available. The Parish Council takes the view that to move the Clacton Road access by 60 metres is likely to result in queued traffic, awaiting access into Long Road, New Road, which in turn is likely to impede traffic attempting to gain entry into the development. This will result in considerable traffic congestion and stalemate. I appreciate the Highways Authority has indicated no objection. However, I do support the Parish Council in their concerns and ask you to seriously consider them in your deliberations. In conclusion, Policy QL9 of the Saved Tendering District Plan states that all new development should make a positive contribution to the quality of the local environment and protect or enhance the local character. It's my contention that this application again fails in that regard. That's my conclusion. Thank you, members.
Thank you very much. Councillor Guglielmi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, fellow members. I'm asking you to refuse this latest attempt to further reduce the landscape in the green gap between Lawford and Mistley.
Councillor, you haven't got your microphone on.
Sorry, better. Yes, I'm asking you to refuse this latest attempt to reduce the landscape and green gap between Lawford and Mistley. We have been against this development right from the offset, and it only received permission by default, by piggybacking on two other developments that provided a financial solution on the Manchester Station underpass. The current permission was for a development which was not wanted, not needed. It will no doubt adversely impact on the location and will put undue pressure on all of our local services. And this comes straight from Education Department of Essex County Council. The applicant has not only never made any attempt in delivering the permission received almost 2 years ago now, but it has perversely challenged the Council's 5-year land supply by claiming that approved permissions were not getting delivered, when the very permission in front of you was one of them. The applicant, furthermore, unsuccessfully tried to shrink the landscape of this permission, as you well know, because you refused it, which has now been appealed, so to make way to squash a further 200 dwellings on the top of the permitted 300. You couldn't make it up, could you? I would also strongly dispute the fact that the 2.5-storey dwellings that have been moved around within the site overcomes the reasons for refusal of last year's attempt to include higher buildings. A clutter of 2.5-storey buildings is a clutter of 2.5-storey buildings, no matter where you put it or how you do it. The simple reason to increase the size of the houses, of course in height, is purely and simple a way to produce a higher price for those houses. I also totally agree with Mistley Parish Council in being very concerned by the fact that the entrance will be moved further north towards the Long Road Junction, which at peak time now is quite problematic. But when several hundred extra vehicles will come out of the development site, it will make the current situation even more unbearable. I would therefore ask you to refuse this latest attempt to reduce the landscape between our villages, as the applicant should be happy enough with the permission that has been awarded. Chairman, may I ask, if this permission is refused, will the other application default automatically?
Yes, I can probably answer that. Yes, it would. There'd be no reason to continue with the second application because that is reliant on this one. The second application is based on the revised parameter plans. It's not based on the original outline. Okay.
Exactly. Thank you very much indeed. I will not speak on the other application. So thank you.
Right, and now Mr. Samuel Bampton, who is an agent for, I think, for both companies. It's down here as City and Country, but I think he's also agent for Tendering Farms Limited, the applicant, if I'm reading it correctly. Right, sir. Welcome. Whereas our district councillor's got 5 minutes, I'm afraid we limit you to 3. But,
I hopefully won't need it all. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee. My name is Sam Bampton. I'm here on behalf of City and Country, who are working with Tendering Farms Limited to deliver the site in Mistley. Given the comprehensive nature of the officer's report, I will try to keep this short. I will also try to cover everything for both applications, so hopefully you won't have to listen to me twice, which will be a relief to you as much as it is to me. Just to start with, I'll clarify things about storey heights and green gaps. So we obviously acknowledge the issues with the parameter plan that was refused last year, and we've worked with officers, and the current layout of storey heights roughly correlates with the approved one. So the approved consent had a cluster of 1 to 2.5 storey in the middle, as this one does, and the rest of the site is now 1 to 2, as was on the other one. And in terms of the green gap, the front part of the site is designated as green gap in the emerging local plan, and we've sought to preserve that as best as possible. going on, many of you will be familiar with the site and its planning history, including the outline approval for 300 units, and in particular the previous application to vary the parameter plans that was refused by the committee last August. The applications before you this evening cover the Phase 1 reserved matters, item 2 of your agenda, and amendments to the parameter plan, which are needed for the reserved matters to accord with the outline approval. It also seeks to confirm the position of the Clacton Road access point further north within the 40-mile-an-hour zones, as requested by Essex County Council in the conditions on the existing outline consent. It also seeks to relocate the commercial space from the southwest corner to the southeast corner to minimise conflicts with residential areas, something we spoke to the parish council about and they were positive about. Following the approval of the outline application, we briefed esteemed architects Purcell to design Phase 1 of the development. They have designed a village environment that reflects the character of the local area. As this proposal took shape, though, it became clear that the layouts of roads and open space within the outline proposal were not conducive to achieving this. As such, when Purcell's draft layout was tabled to officers during pre-application discussions, it was suggested that we should submit an amendment to the parameter plans accordingly, and we subsequently submitted the application that was refused by the committee last August. In hindsight, it is acknowledged that these parameter plans previously submitted were simplistic in nature, and on reflection, more detail was required to give the committee the confidence that they would need that this would secure a high-quality development. Since the committee decision last August, we have worked with officers to address these concerns. In particular, these include, but are not limited to, clarification on the restriction of storey heights across the site, the inclusion of additional green space throughout the development, and the reintroduction of a circular walk around the edge of the site. The result is a scheme that has the full support of your officers as set out in their report, but more importantly, hopefully one that you as the committee can support. The scheme is one we are very proud of, and if these applications are approved, it will allow work to commence delivering a high-quality development on the site. And to respond to some of the comments by ward councillors, we obviously submitted these applications last March, and the only reason we haven't been able to deliver the site is we don't have a detailed consent. And I'm sure the officers would be the first to tell you they would be straight out enforcing on us if I turned up with a digger. So we are keen to deliver this site, and let's make that clear. But to conclude, for the reasons mentioned, we agree with the officers' recommendation for approval and ask the committee to endorse this view. Thank you very much for your time. I look forward to listening to your discussion.
Thank you very much, sir. Right.
There was a reference to Mistley Parish Council, and it's Fairhall is Mistley Parish Council, and the Parish Council were never consulted, but I don't know if you would like to
Well, I did approach the representative from the Mistley Council and ask whether they wanted to speak, Councillor.
This is in relation to what has just been said.
Right. Well, it'll be up now to the officer just to make comments on that. Is there any points that have been raised by anybody that you wish to add to or take away from?
No, nothing on the first round of on this particular application, other than just to reinforce the fact that the original outline did have a cluster of 2.5 storey in the centre. This is the same, and that scaled down to sort of 1 to 2 stories near the perimeter, which this one does as well. The green gap, as has been stated, which is this area here in the north, and you'll find on the other side of Long Road, on the north side of North Road. It does provide continuity between the two areas of green gaps, so that's been retained in accordance with the emerging plan. So it doesn't encroach to any sort of material extent on the green gap designations or allocations.
Right. So, councillors, it is now your chance. You've heard the application, you've been on the site. Some of us have been on the site several times. We know it very well. And just to remind you that this is for a variation of condition 4 of the application, and it is principally to do with, at this time, the heights of the building, the revised road entrance in Clacton Road, and the movement of what I will call the industrial area from the southwest to the southeast. Right, councillors, your chance. Councillor Everett.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to kick off with the revised route of the highway. Where exactly will that meet on that diagram or another diagram that you might have, please?
The access points, well, on the outline, on this application, it includes the new Clacton Road access at this point, and that will link through to both this... Sorry. That will link through to this part of the site, which is the long road access, which was determined at outline stage. The idea is to have the long road access running right through the site to connect to later phases of development. At the moment, the subsequent application that you'll be hearing in terms of reserve matters just addresses the phase one, which is the northern site. But for the purposes of this outline, the main road system will link Long Road with Clacton Road, except that they are intending to put in systems to slow vehicles down. I know that there may be an intention to, at a later stage, to incorporate the possibility of a bus route access to possibly the centre, but that's not before us now. That would only be done on the basis that the roads would be to a suitable standard to achieve that. Does that answer the question you were raising? Would it be helpful for me to comment on that? It probably would, Sam.
No, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry. No. I can... Perhaps it's the drawings for the next application shows that the roads do not connect. There will not be a rat run through between the one from the Clacton Road feeds largely the properties adjacent to Clacton Road, and the one from Long Road feeds, as just been described, the main body of the other developments. I'm sure that was on the drawing that I've seen of showing the highway, so they don't interconnect.
Thank you. That's half of my concern dealt with. The other half of the concern is what treatment is done on Long Road and Clacton Road. Are we talking lights, roundabouts, visibility displays, etc.? What sort of junctions are we looking at?
That doesn't feature as part of this application. That was addressed as part of the outline application, and there were highway improvements that were incorporated into a Section 106 agreement. So the details of that have still to be agreed. Sorry?
I find that a bit concerning because I would want to know, as the decision maker in this, what the treatment of the junction is, particularly on the one that's been relocated, because it's absolutely pertinent to the application, to the outline application.
Right. Was.
Yeah. It's all part of reserve matters, and it falls back to 106.
Whilst we're checking, can we see if there's any further questions while we're doing that? Councillor McWilliams.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I turned myself off. My concerns were as well with the access and how that had changed, because that's relevant, obviously, to what we're discussing this evening. My main concern is the 2.5 storey. I just feel that, having read what was mentioned at the last refusal, when we refused before under QL9, in my opinion, that still all applies. I can't see that this has made any difference to that. I don't know if officers have got anything to sort of add to that. But it's, again, it is the visual aspect. It is in the rural countryside. It's not an urban area. And I'm glad that the officer has highlighted the fact that about the rat run, because I was very concerned about that. Living in a village, I know what it's like with a rat run. So that would be fine if that was all sorted out. But those are just my comments at this time, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Just to confirm again, the 2.5 story at outline is fundamentally no different to the 2.5 story that you have in front of you now. It was a 2.5 story central core to the development in outline form, and that's exactly what we have here.
Does that answer the point? Yes.
Yeah. Right, so that was the original approval, which shows the 2.5 story around a central core and dropping to 2 story elsewhere with a small element below the 2 story. And then if we roll forward to what they're now asking for, which is that 2.5 story central core, it's just graphically, it's just portrayed in a different way.
So, yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Page 7, County Archaeological. I wonder if you mind explaining to me this, or telling me how we are with this, unable to comment on as the programme of archaeological trials, trenching and excavation secured by condition has not yet taken place.
The original condition required simply that trial trenching be carried out prior to the commencement of development. So because development hasn't commenced, the condition doesn't change. It remains the same. That the trenching and the trial trenching and the investigation works are carried out prior to commencement, and that would still apply.
Yes. Come back, by all means.
I was looking this afternoon. It's an area of some considerable archaeological interest. So we are saying that this hasn't been carried out because up to date there is no need for it to be carried out. But the guarantee is that this will be carried out. And when will we know that?
The condition doesn't change. The condition requires that archaeological investigation is carried out prior to commencement. I mean, that will still pertain. The original outline, the condition remains identical, and there's no requirement on behalf of the developer or applicant to carry out that work at this stage.
Yes, Councillor Benison.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would it be possible to see, I know we can't, it's a pity we can't see them next to each other, the outline that has been approved, and then with regard to all the layout and the roads, entrances, and the one that's being applied for at the moment. Could we just see them in succession, please?
You mean the master plan?
Yeah.
Okay.
The original equipment. The original.
Okay, that's the original approved outline, which shows that is just the outline master plan layout. Moving forward, that's the current one. I think, admittedly, there is a sort of slight additional area of development in this corner. I think prior to that, the road took a line a little bit, took that shoulder off that development.
Can we go back to the
Yeah.
original one?
So the difference being just in this a small segment around there.
Thank you. When this came before us before, we were quite concerned that with the industrial estate, traffic would be coming through the residential area, and we asked for provision to be made for the road to be the access to be lower, and for access to be available to come through, so it didn't have to come through houses. But on the new one, I see the traffic will now have to come to go to the industrial estate. Will have to come more through the housing sector. Can you confirm that for me, please?
No, that is not the intention. That is not the intention. Access to the industrial area, which is now going to be around there, is off the public highway in that area, and that is the access point. There's no link between, certainly no vehicular link intended between the industrial area and the housing.
Thank you. Could we see the new application then, please? So can you show me where the access is now? That's there. Thank you.
Just to mention briefly, that everything to do with the employment area will feature in a future reserved matters application. The second application we're dealing with is just purely for reserved matters for the top part of the site. The areas, including the access or anything to do with employment, will be a future reserved matters application.
Yes, Councillor Holmes. Michael.
You just this second said that we're actually dealing with the top half of that plan, yeah? That's what you're asking
That's
for?
the second application.
The second application?
That's the one that follows this. Yeah.
Sorry, the one that, when I refer to the top half of the site, there's a second application that follows from this one that is for reserved matters, and that reserved matters application only deals with the top part of the site. It follows, if you follow the arrow, the cursor there, it comes down there and takes in that area there with the access of Clacton Lane. So all of the bottom area of the site is not before us today. We haven't got an application in for reserved matters for that part of the site yet. We're purely dealing with a variation of the original outline consent.
Yeah. Yes.
So, how can we make a decision on that then? Because you're showing us the bottom half there. If we vote this particular one in and the next one that comes with it, we're voting that whole site in as is. There won't be any more, will there? Apart from maybe the entrance to the other, the industrial.
The purpose of the application is to vary the parameter plans. The parameter plans aren't finite plans. They're plans that give basically an overview of what would be permissible. They're not sort of cast in stone. That is something that's done at a later stage, so that many aspects of the layout can be tinkered with, played around with, and depending on what is needed when they take the design process forward. So this is just purely for the variation of approved parameter plans. So it's a variation going back to in respect of that outline. Sorry, I seem to have lost this. All right. It's a variation from that to that.
Yeah, I will give you a chance to do that, John. I think you will have checked and you will have seen that the second application is for phase one. This whole estate is divided into different phases, and the business area will obviously be a different phase. So really all we're looking at tonight is physically moving it from the southwest to the southeast, and then the entranceways will come under another phase, as my explanation. Do you want to come back on that?
Yeah,
and then
please.
I'm going to Councillor.
No, I'd like to, John.
Yeah.
So we're discussing the top half because the industrial part is nothing to do with this.
Only the movement.
Yeah, sorry, that's what we discussed.
Yeah.
But not yet. This is in the second half, yeah?
Yeah.
Well, why is it showing the whole sign? I can't see that we're only voting on the top half for whatever reason.
Right. Just ask Head of Planning if you can comment on that.
No, that's all right. It is confusing because you've got two different applications before you tonight, ostensibly about the same site, but they're dealing with different things. So this first item that you're considering is a variation to an existing outline planning permission. So you've already planning permission has already been granted in outline for the whole of this site. And one of the conditions attached to that outline planning permission required that all the details that flow from that come back to you as reserved matters, comply with various plans that were submitted and approved at that outline stage. One of those plans was the story heights, was how tall the buildings were going to be. And Jeff has shown us the comparison between what was approved originally and what's being requested now. It's a very similar mix of varying from 1 storey through to 2.5 in the centre, but the configuration of where the 2.5 storey is proposed to be has changed. So it's changed in terms of its shape, really, rather than the amount of it, but it's still in the centre of the site. One of the other plans that was approved at outline and is now back in front of you for a slight variation is about landscaping, about the amount of landscaping. And again, Jeff showed you the comparison between what's approved and what's now being requested. And there is a reduction in the amount, but it's more than the one that you refused last summer. It's about halfway in between in terms of quantity. It's well over the local plan requirement, and it does safeguard the green gap between the settlements. The opportunity's also been taken in bringing this to you to look at moving the position of the Colchester Road, the Clacton Road access, so that it's more central between the bend at the bottom of Clacton Road and the junction at the top. And the opportunity's also been taken to move the employment from the southwest corner to the southeast corner. But the precise details of what the housing will look like, what the employment will look like, and how the junctions will be configured in detail come forward as reserved matters. So they're not things that you're looking at for this item.
You still hasn't answered my question.
About why we're looking at the whole plan, not half of the plan.
This plan is a complete different to the one that was approved, yeah? It's definitely different. It's the whole plan is different.
It is different, but you have to remember you're only looking at the general principles, not the finer detail, if you like. So you're looking.
If we approve this plan, when we get to the next one, and we decide that we don't like it, we want to refuse it, does this one still hold if we pass this one?
If this application is approved, then the Story Heights plan and the landscaping plan and this illustrative master plan will yes, will be conditioned to run with that planning permission.
So we are voting on the illustrative master plan?
Yes, you are, for the whole site.
It's completely changed to what it used to, what that was approved.
Well, I think it depends.
Maybe not the height, but the whole plan has changed.
Yeah.
So what we look at, it was approved. Can you put it back to the one that was approved? I mean, I understand they got less green space there now. Yeah. But it's the whole thing has been changed. There's just no room in the middle there now. I know there's a bit of a landscape gone there, but there's no telling us where the roads are going on the other one. I know that's not probably what we've got to look at, but it's all there for us to see what we're voting on. You know, if you're telling us we're not voting on the houses that have been moved, then that's fine. But we are voting on that.
The condition says in general conformity. At least I assume that's the standard wording. It will say that the reserve matters have to be in general conformity with the master plan. There are differences between the approved master plan and the one that's before you tonight, and we've sort of run over those. Personally, I wouldn't say it's completely different. I think there's a lot of similarity between what's approved and the one that's before you, and we've tried to draw out, and I think all of your discussion has kind of drawn out where there are differences. Certainly the way the roads are suggested to be laid out is different, but you're not dealing with that kind of detail at this stage, the precise line of the road. You're dealing with the whole of that plan, but in quite general terms, not the sort of detail of precisely the line of the roads.
Well, I mean, I'm going to vote refusal on it then, because as far as I can see, we're not voting on what we're looking at. And it's as simple as that. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, these plans do not account for what we want to vote for. You say, and I think the way they've got round it, just let me finish this bit. The way they've got round it, or whoever it is has got round it, is they've decided to change one from there to there. And by doing that, they've changed the whole site. The whole site has been changed. And that's what we're voting on, but we're not voting on the whole site. Yeah, well, that's the point. It's still changed.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Everett.
Been thinking about this because I've actually been in this situation myself, where I've actually put in a variation to change a condition. And when I did that, I was told by this authority that allowed the whole application to be considered again. It didn't mean that the whole application previously was dead. It meant that the authority could look at everything in the application, not just the variation of condition. And in fact, they added another condition, which wasn't related to the variation of condition at all. So my understanding of planning law, and I looked it up at the time on the NPPF website, is that when a variation of condition comes before us, we can actually look at all related issues to the application. So what we've just been told by officers is slightly at odds with that. So I think we need some guidance here about what actually is the legal position, please.
Right.
Yeah, I think if I just check that I've kind of got the question correctly. You're obviously looking at the application or the merits of the application generally again, but in order to come to a different conclusion to what you came to before, there would obviously need to be materially different circumstances. So obviously I appreciate you didn't make the decision before, but obviously the inspector's decision is an extant planning application. This is a variation to that. So you are looking at everything as a whole, but you have to remember that there is significant history attached to the application that is material to your determination and the reasonableness of how you balance that. Does that help?
That makes sense.
Okay.
I had Councillor McWilliams.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Charlotte. That was good. And that leads me on to something else, listening to what was being said. If you look in your report, I do wonder why we get some of the things that are within the report. If you look at 6.22, and that does make reference back to my one that I was harping on about, the 2.5 stories. And if you just read that through, you can actually, it does state in the report that when it can come back to reserve matters, it's still there. So it will come back when it is reserve matters, and that's when a decision can be made over that again, if I've read that number correctly. I'm just looking at you, Charlotte, I'm sorry, but that's how I'm reading that.
Yeah, I think that's my understanding. I think that was something we've discussed sort of previously. And yeah, so if just because it says you can have 2.5 storey in that central section, there has to be a mix that works for the development, is my understanding, and the planning officers will correct me if I'm wrong, but it still needs to be in keeping with how you would expect the development to be, so it can't necessarily just be a whole blanket of 2.5 storey just because it says in that area is acceptable in principle.
Right. As far as moving the employment area is concerned, I know it's stretching my imagination quite a bit, but one of the points when we originally looked at this site, we said how silly it was to put the employment land at the extremities of the site. And to that end, by moving it much nearer now to the roadway, it would save the very heavy traffic going right the way through the estate. So I personally would be in favour of that move. I think it does make sense, and it's one of the things that obviously in discussions our officers have picked up with the developer. As far as the other point goes, my recollection, again, we've seen so many plans, this is the problem, that at one time the whole estate nearly looked 2.5 stories high. By keeping it all in one place round, I think is a good idea, especially if we have the lower properties adjacent to Clacton Road and Long Road. The nearest properties to them are something like, I think we measured it yesterday, was about 80 metres from them. And if they're kept to be the bungalows and the low properties, that makes sense in my mind as well. The fact has been raised by one of the councillors that this is probably one of the highest points in the whole of the Tendring Peninsula. Makes one wonder whether 2.5 stories is needed, but that's another point. And on the types of houses, I think it's better to keep them in a recognised area rather than having them suddenly standing outside on one of the other proposals. My own personal views, councillors, but there we go. Right, further points. Yes, councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. You've just spoken about something that I'd picked up that I was going to talk about. On page 12 again, 623, it says, subject to the detailed design of the commercial units being acceptable given the visually exposed nature of this corner of the site. It does mean that we're going to have commercial units right on the road there, which will not be very attractive. And I just thought exactly the opposite to you, I'm afraid, but so it's just my point. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, I have to accept that. But as we don't know what units are going there at this stage, until that comes in reserve matters, it is a job. My view was to keep the heavier buildings away from the heavier lorries away from the houses. But right. Any further points? Yes, Councillor Everett.
I have a further question about the green gap at the top. The boundary of the green gap identified in the emerging local plan, is that completely covered by that area, exactly, more than, less than, or what?
I believe it correlates accurately with it. The green gap in the emerging plan is the area to be retained as public open space in the north. And it comes across from a point where we have the arrow there, which is the corner of the development by the road intersection. So if you take a line across there parallel with Long Road, all of that land is Green Gap, but not land to the south of that. And as mentioned just before, it has a depth of about 80 metres at that point.
Right, councillors, I'm in your hands. Looking for Councillor Alexander. Please.
This is just purely an observation, with maybe some feedback I'd be grateful to. I'm finding this all rather confusing, to be perfectly frank with you. The original application that was before us was entirely different to what we're looking at now, and that's acceptable. Things get changed. But the height of the properties, which Councillor McWilliams brought up, is still there, and the problems of them are still very much in the firing line. I wonder if I just don't see. I think this, to me, this looks like a completely different application, and I think that should be treated as such. I'm not sure how I actually truly feel on this, and I don't know if my fellow councillor is confused as I am, but it would have been nice to have seen this together as a unit, so we know where this is going. Remember, we get these papers a short time. We have to study and plough through them, which we have religiously, and look up on the internet for any information that we don't have. But you've had it for some considerable time more, so your in-depth knowledge is much greater than ours about how you're looking at this. But I perceive it in an entirely different way than what you do. Entirely. I'm sorry.
If I could just interject, the government brought in, or has done for a while, the option to vary a condition on a planning application to enable amendments to be made without it being necessary to go back to the basic point of, or the basic stage of putting a new application in. This is partly to sort of speed up the planning process and just facilitate amendments that aren't fundamental to the overall scheme. And I think from our perspective, we would view this as not being fundamental change. It's certainly significant enough to warrant a planning application, which is why it's been submitted. But it's not so fundamental as to change the overall nature and character of what was originally approved.
Right. Head of Planning.
Thanks, Chair. I think it feels as if the committee are probably heading towards a vote fairly soon, so I thought it might just be worth recapping on what permission there is and what the sort of fallback position is. So at the moment, there's outline planning permission, and we've seen the parameters plans that exist for those, and we've been comparing the application that's before you with those, and I think members have expressed mix of views and a few concerns that perhaps it's not quite as good as the outline that was originally approved. If this application that's before you tonight is refused, then yes, the applicants can revert to the approved scheme. But clearly, by making now 2 applications to change those parameters plans, I think that's a clear indication they feel there are issues with that approval that's likely to prevent them from doing that. I think they're not likely to use that fallback position and implement the currently approved scheme. They have appealed against the application that was refused last summer. Clearly, members were very clear that evening that the parameters plans that were shown then were unacceptable. Those are the plans that showed potentially 2.5 stories across the site and a much more significant reduction in green space. The hearing for that appeal is imminent in the next few weeks, and so the applicants, I think, are much more likely to pursue that current appeal, and potentially that would result in a planning permission if they were successful, than they are to appeal a refusal on the application that's before you tonight. So what I'm trying to say is, if you refuse planning permission tonight, I think there's quite a strong possibility that the applicants will continue to pursue the current appeal on the scheme that I'm very confident you don't wish to see implemented. Granting planning permission for the ones before you tonight, I understand from the applicants, is sufficient. They have reserved matters, that's before you tonight as well, worked up. They would go ahead and probably implement that scheme.
Right. Councillor Holmes?
Okay, I'll move for refusal on this. If they want to go the other way, let them. They've already went one way and got the permission. I personally don't think they'll get it again, but that's my opinion, same as everybody else's. I propose refusal on this, and they can revert back to the old one that they managed to get through and appeal. If not, I don't know how they can appeal or get for another one if the other appeal was after that and got passed before it. But there you go. If you're saying they've got another appeal in, then let them take it. I refuse. I'm putting in for refusal on this.
Right. Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chairman. It is true to say that has definitely been a bit confusing, but I'd like to thank Mrs Bicknell for some clarity on that, because suddenly I think a light bulb came on above me. And we do see so much, and it is sometimes very difficult to get that moment of clarity. With some regret, but then with some clarity, I will be supporting this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any further comments? I will then ask for seconders, but if there's any further comments that need to be made. No. Well, you heard I've got two proposals, contrary proposals. I'll take, as I did last time, I'll take Councillor Hones first, as he was the first one to do it. Do I have a seconder for Councillor Hones' proposal? I don't. Then I'm going to ask Councillor Fowler. I was reading between the lines. Is she prepared to propose?
Yes, Chairman. I'm happy to propose approval.
Right.
Thank you. As per conditions.
Right. Do I have a seconder for Councillor Fowler? Thank you. Right. We have a seconder now. Any further points before I put it to the vote? And I'll ask planning colleagues whether they've got anything to add at this stage. No. Right, you're being asked to vote to approve this application with the list of conditions that are shown on page 3 for up to 300 dwellings. And yes.
Can I just confirm in terms of the conditions that they are the same as the previous application in all respects, or at least that's not what I mean, that at least all of the previous conditions are included within that?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And anything that was agreed the first time through will carry through. This is only a revision. Right. Those in favour, please show. 1, 2, 3. And thank you. And those against, please show. 1. There must be a lot of abstentions. Those abstaining then, let's tie the numbers of votes up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So looking at the score, it is approved with those conditions as shown on page 3. Right. Thank you very much. It does mean that we can now move to A2, which is agenda item 4, when I think some of the points that have been raised might be highlighted because this is an in-depth detail for phase 1. That is the top part of the estate. And to quote the number first for the record, it's 1700535, a detailed application. Right, we've got it up, so let's turn to Greg for this one. Thank you.
Right, the Reserve Matters application deals with access, appearance, landscaping, layout and scale for phase 1 of the development, and that includes 96 residential units. Following the application you've just had before you. The application was also amended. They've taken out reference to some retail floor space, which was to be in the middle of the 96 houses. So that's been taken out to accord more correctly with the original terms of the approval. So same outline, same photograph, same site, and that is phase 1. So that covers the top half of the site. That accords with the layout that was shown in the master plan that you've just had in front of you, the master parameter plan layout with the landscaping layout and with the building heights layout. The building heights in this one, 2.5 story in the centre, just around this area here. That's a 2.5 story flatted development. The rest being 2 story. That shows it in the context of landscaping and in the context of the overall site. This gives a street scene view, the proposed street scene, which shows the larger, the 2.5 story development in the middle and falling down to sort of 2 story surrounding it. The style is much more involved, perhaps, and more complementary, perhaps, as well, also to the nature of the area and the character of the area. Details of the actual building types: terraces of 3 story, 4 story, semi-detached. Did I say 4-storey? 4-bed, sorry. It's very useful to have somebody to pull you up like this. Detached, semi-detached. So quite a variety of buildings. No bungalows at this stage, quite involved detailing in terms of some of the actual building types and house facades and elevational treatments. Garage units, storage units, and refuse units. The layout is incorporates all the garden sizes up to standard, all the parking is up to standard. The highway specification is full width 5.5 minimum through the main part, that will then link into the other phases. There's the landscaping content. I'll take you back to that drawing. They've introduced screening along the long road corridor and leisure walks through this part of the site. In fact, the intention would be to link all the way around, as shown here, to have leisure dog walking routes and the like around the whole site. And that follows from that was a response to Natural England's requirements to offset the potential impact on Ramsar sites. The purpose being that there's no need for people to take the dogs walking near the estuary areas that are protected. The central area is effectively a village square type of approach, with the 2.5-storey building on one side and hard surfacing inside. This will be more of a localized community provision. The soft landscaping, including children's play areas and water features both here and down the side. Again, this area being a later phase, will obviously be conditioned further to address the details of the planting scheme. Although the design and access statement that supports the application is reasonably detailed in that respect. So we've followed the appearance of it, the landscaping, the layout, the scale, and this represents 96 dwelling units, which is just below a third. The outline was for 300. So in approximate terms, it's a third of the site and a third of the housing provision. That's in terms of the developed area. And the density of development is well below the 30 units per dwellings per hectare prescribed. That more or less sums up the application.
Right, thank you. Now, I have no member of the public speaking for or against. Nobody from the parish, and the ward members have decided to leave. So I go straight to the agent applicant, Mr. Bampton, please, if he wishes to add anything to this one. No, thank you.
No, I think I covered everything, so I won't bore you again. So, carry on.
Right, thank you. In that case, There'll be nothing extra from the officers. Councillors, it's down to you now. This is the first stage, and or phase, rather, I should say. And this is the chance now to have a look at the various bits and pieces more in depth, and you can, it's not a good example, but you can see the side road where it doesn't meet up with the one from Long Road. So, or you can meet it by footpath, but it doesn't cause this rat run. Right, over to you, speakers. Councillor McWilliams.
Sorry, but I'm going to have to say it. I'm disappointed to see that the 2.5-storey is apartments. I'm really, really sorry to see that, and how that can sort of blend in with a village atmosphere. I don't understand, but I just had to say it because we did discuss it previously, and I just felt it was. I don't think that's in character with the rest of the. If the officer doesn't mind just putting up the actual facade, please. Yeah, and can we see the other one, which was in more detail as to what that would look like? Yes, right. I don't think that's a rural setting in my eyes, but that's just me personally. But I just felt I would have to actually say that, Chair. Thank you.
Right, Councillor Brown.
Thank you. I know this is only 1/3 of the application, but is there any community areas or shops or anything of that sort? I mean, it's quite a way. I know the site, obviously. It's quite a way away from any real amenities. Thank you.
The application, when it first came in, did actually have some sort of retail elements that at the time they intended to incorporate in the ground floor of the apartment block. That didn't really accord with the terms of the original outline permission, which didn't have any retail elements at all. I think informally we've indicated that we wouldn't be averse to that occurring at some stage, but they would need to, if this were to be approved, that would have to come in some sort of amended form.
My only comment to that really is that my only comment to that really is that in some planning applications that would be considered to contribute to being unsustainable, because it's quite a way to any real amenities from there.
Any further comments? Councillor Alexander, do you wish to? Right. I think you lot have lost your tongues tonight, I think. Councillor Everett.
I know that we're not looking at the original outline application because we've just amended it for the one that we just did. However, in the original one, there were some one-storey buildings. In the one that we've just amended, we said 1 to 2. But I don't see any evidence on this that we're going to get anything less than 2, particularly as this is a third of the site. And so I'm a bit concerned that the original intention, and the intention of us just a few minutes ago, to have some low rise, is not really being met by the developer. I also concur with my colleague Linda McWilliams that the 2.5-storey buildings, and not including any retail element, is also a little bit really not in the spirit of the thing. So I'm concerned that the developer here is actually perhaps not following the spirit of what we were trying to say to them. And that concerns me.
Comments to that, I'll go straight to Greg, but this is only phase one, of course.
Chairman, I think that's exactly right. I think, importantly, I think the applicant is obviously sitting here tonight, and we'll hear those comments being made. And I think, certainly as officers, we would work with them to come up with some sort of community facility. I think the key is going to be, would there be a demand for that type of unit within the site? I think that's probably going to be the determining factor as to whether that would ultimately be provided. We can certainly work with the applicant to get something in the second phase of this, in terms of a retail element. In terms of the single-storey element, again, I agree, it's part of the overall description, 1 to 2.5 stories in height. But I think, as we discussed in the previous application, as you move further south, the site becomes more open. And I think there's more opportunity for single-storey units within that part of the scheme, rather than perhaps this first element. But again, take on what members are saying. We'll talk to the applicant about that, and certainly try and build them into the second and third phases.
Thank you. Linda McWilliams.
Chairman, I'm minded to think with what Graham's just said. Is there any way that, I quite understand, yes, the more open aspect would blend itself to more single dwellings, the single-storey dwellings, because of its being further out in the country. Is there any way we can actually condition that with the applicant, that they do make sure that that is what's going to happen, and to also provide some shopping facilities? You're talking about 300 houses here, and without a shop to go to, or even a pub, it could be difficult.
Chairman, we couldn't put a condition like that on this reserved matter. That's the problem. The outline permission has been granted. Possibly if we could have demanded that there should be some retail within the site, any condition should have gone on the original outline. I think certainly we want to. That's something we can discuss with the applicant and get that put into the reserved matters. Though there's no reason why we can't do that. So we'd certainly work towards that.
Councillor Bennison.
Thank you, Chairman. I was wanting to respond to Councillor Everett's remarks of earlier, but I can't remember what they were now, but I got missed. We were talking about, the officers were talking about the town square earlier, the community square in the middle. And when I saw the designs, first of all, I just assumed they were shops with apartments above them, and I was quite shocked to realise that that was apartments on the ground floor as well. I'm also concerned that this initial application for the first 96 doesn't include any bungalows, and if it went through like this at this stage, the next phase, would that have any bungalows? And then if there's a third phase, would that have any bungalows in? I feel we're being steered towards two-storey dwellings all the way through, and no, as my colleague has said, no provision for any shops or pubs. The shops are a long walk away. There's no parking in Manningtree High Street, as we know. So people would have to walk there. If there are going to be bungalows, elderly people might be persuaded to buy a bungalow if they are eventually built. And it would be very difficult. I have difficulty walking that distance, and I'm sure others would also. And it is an unsustainable site at the moment. So I would agree with everything that's been said before. Thank you.
Councillor Everett.
And picking up on all of those points made by the committee, I'd like to put a proposal that we defer this application for discussion between the officers and the developers on those very matters.
Right. Yes, Councillor.
And I'll second that. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, yes, I am reminded, rightly so, that if we're going to defer, we need to be quite specific on what we're deferring on. And so far, it would seem on purely as it is more, at least a mile, if not more, to the nearest shop. We're talking about that sort of thing. Also, am I reading you correctly that you would like, even in this stage, to have seen some bungalows? Are there any further points that we would want our officers to approach on? No, nobody's picked anything up. Don't know whether the officers can help on. Is there anything further that we think we could usefully bring under this?
Chairman, I think they were the two key points, weren't they? That the members do want some single story and some, at least a retail outlet. So I think that's pretty clear.
Good. Well, we'll vote on that, and if and when it comes back, make your mind up. This is the time where you can get any inquiry in. It's no good coming back after discussions have taken place. So with that in mind, I have a mover and a seconder that we defer this item for those specific subjects of discussion. You all understand that one? Right. Those in favour of deferment then please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right. And those against? 1. And abstaining? 1, which means I'm short of. So I'll go with the deferment. So I'll add another one with that one. So yes, that is going to be deferred for further discussions. Right. Thank you. Now the chap who's just moved. Well, I can welcome back my Vice Chairman. So
About 20 minutes.
he was actually sitting outside with the speakers, and he's just made a comment to me. There was quite a bit of discussion, both from the floor and that came through on the microphone. So we'll have to watch any side talking that goes through, because it does get picked up and put on the recording. Right, we move on to item A3, that's agenda item 5 on your agenda, page 31, which is planning application 17/02204 full. This is the Crown Business Centre, Old Ipswich Road, Ardleigh, which a lot of us knew as the golf driving range, I believe, in times of old. Right, straight to Greg.
Okay, there's the red outline. You've got the Crown Inn in the bottom corner here. This is the Old Ipswich Road running northeast southwest, and this is the main road to Ipswich. At the rear of the site, there's been quite extensive gravel workings that are that will in time become an extension to the Ardleigh Reservoir, and I'll show you a scheme of that shortly. and along this part of Ipswich Road, on the same side as the development site, the application site, there's quite a number of heavy industrial uses up there. You've got the intersection on the A12 just down, a little bit further down here, and on this side of Old Ipswich Road, there's a hotel, a modernist type of hotel, and an office development that is, I think it's called Apex 12. But that falls in the adjoining borough. So gravel workings clearly seen there. This is the site, level, green, as mentioned, an old, been used in the past as a driving range, not very intensively. And you'll note right across the middle of the site, there's a row of mature, deciduous, native species trees. Along this boundary, at some stage they've planted conifers, which are pretty huge at the moment, and behind which there's some catch fencing to protect that's still in place from the golf driving use. Crown Business Centre is a range of low single-storey buildings down in this corner here, with a separate access off Old Ipswich Road. This is from Old Ipswich Road, looking into the site, an existing access, and this is the one they intend to reuse. You can just pick up in the distance the trees that form the central line through. That's from the golf driving range car park looking into the site. That's a farm, well, industrial farm buildings up in the corner. This shows the extant outline consent for a hotel, which is here, and ranges of office and industrial uses here. Exactly the same site. This was another extant consent for redevelopment of the Crown Business Park. There was a condition on this application requiring prior to development of the residential units that a certain number of replacement, I think we call them replacement, commercial units would be provided within this development. They were all, that's a cluster of four detached houses, same access. And that shows the extension to the Ardleigh Reservoir. So the site boundary is there. There's a landscape belt to the rear, which is quite a substantial buffer zone, and that's actually been planted at this current moment, and is I don't know when it was planted. It's probably about 3 meters high or so. The layout, 5 detached, more sort of upmarket office units arranged on the nearer to the Old Ipswich Road part of the site. The intention being you come through the site, and then at the rear, with the reservoir to the rear, there's a sort of Muse-style development of lower-rise, smaller starter-type units, either offices or B1 uses, which is light industrial use. They've incorporated communal toilet, washroom type facilities, mainly because a lot of the site isn't, this part of the site won't be connected to water mains. That's an indication of the larger buildings. 4 offices per floor, 2 floors in the building. Elevations in white rendered lower parts, grey cladding upper parts, different coloured grey profiled roofing. And the small units follow similar pattern, just generally sort of lower in height, smaller in scale. Gives an indication of the floor areas involved. Quite small, intended as sort of one-person units, starting at one person and slightly larger. That's a indicative perspective, taken, I think, from other ones that have been developed in other parts of the country. This shows the trees to be retained from the original line of trees that went through the site. I believe they're oaks. They have been subject to TPOs, and the intention is to retain all but one or two specimens that aren't in very good condition, and take out more of a prime example, which I believe is that one there. That was probably at the forefront of the photographs you saw. That aspect is supported by the tree officer, who believes that there will be sufficient new planting to overcome any perceived loss, and also given that the trees aren't very readily seen from the public domain. The tree officer's comments are included on the update, so there's quite a section where he addresses that. I think that follows on from concerns that were expressed by members during the course of the site visit last Wednesday. The conifer screen, which actually screens most of the site, certainly from the motorway, the trunk road, and Old Ipswich Road, the screen is to be retained. The applicants have research demand for this. It remains a speculative development, but then the outline consent that it follows from was also speculative. There's obviously been felt to be sort of higher demand for this sort of development than one that would have included a hotel in this location, certainly. The parking is up to standard on this section, and up to the county standards for parking, in excess of it actually. And in this area, all units are provided with a large parking bay for either car or van or light commercial vehicles. There would be conditions restricting the use of the site for any heavy industrial uses or external storage of materials. So the character of this sort of business park would be retained. And in that respect, very much like the Apex 12 development just down the road. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, but that's a slightly sort of upmarket form of enterprise. There are highways improvements to be made. A 2-metre section of along this, from the new access along this part of the Old Ipswich Road, which will then come down to the Crown Hotel, where there's and past the vehicular access into the Crown Inn or Hotel, down to the pedestrian access into the hotel. And then cross over Old Ipswich Road and to link with, I lost my cursor. There we to link across it. There's a very, you can maybe just pick out a footpath across that central green area, a green island there, so there'll be a crossover to the central green island and then across to the other side of Old Ipswich Road to link in with an existing footpath, which is albeit quite narrow, but it's a recognised surfaced footpath that in turn links down to past Apex 12 and all of the development on further to the south on Old Ipswich Road, past the hotel there. Landscaping schemes throughout around the perimeter and to reinforce the tree retention strip down the middle. No landscaping to the rear, not necessary because of the landscaping that's already been carried out on the reservoir side. There's a shelter belt up on the north side, again very mature trees and very limited public view into the site from any of the surrounding highways. That concludes.
Thank you very much. Right, now then, I have no public speakers in favour or against the application. You have the notes of the Ardleigh Parish Council. No ward member, and although the agent is with us this evening, I don't know whether he wishes to have his 3 minutes or whether he's happy to leave it as it is. Right, thank you very much. So we have no public speaking. Councillor Bennis.
Thank you, Chairman. Could we go back to the slide of the where it shows the 5 at the top, the big ones, and that's the one. Could you point out to me where the toilet block is, please? And then I'd like to come back on that.
Within these 5 units, within these 5 units, all the facilities are integral. So the central staircase, disabled access, and at least certainly to the ground floor. There's no lift. It's only 2-storey building. But the central toilet facilities are central to the building core. It is just with this particular layout here, they have certain areas where there are communal toilets, and you can pick them out in blue.
So could you tell me how many toilets are available for 91 units, which would potentially could be employing 91 times 4 people? And are there any disabled toilets available in those blues, please?
I can't actually give you a figure for the number of toilets, but if there was concern about that, it would have to meet standards, obviously. We can condition the application to ensure that there's a satisfactory number, and that indeed disabled toilets form part of that.
Further questions? Yes, Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. I notice in the conditions 20 and 21, removal of permitted development rights. Can you just expand on that? Because one of the concerns I have, and it's the only concern, is that these are starter units. So is there the facility for, say, somebody that needs to expand just to double their starter unit to either knock down the wall between, or would they then have to take over another unit? So I'm just wondering what the removal of the permitted development rights are actually removed. What are we removing in that condition? Thank you.
Okay. I don't think the intention would be to try and frustrate extension of one unit into 2, because there's already there are some larger units within this complex anyway. slightly larger units. The intention is more to restrict alterations, concerns over, for example, if the site to this site behind the Crown Hotel were to be developed for residential, to, for example, ensure that overlooking didn't occur, that alterations weren't carried out that would cause any problems like that. Admittedly, that only relates to sort of this end of the site, but over large, it's really to remove the conversion of offices to residential in the long term.
Right. No further. Well, I'll kick another question in. I wasn't clear on Anglia Water Services to say that due to lack of information, they couldn't assess the impact on the water recycling centre, and asked for various things to be put in the clause. But at this stage, I would have thought we should be looking at definite decisions, not leaving it to looking at something a bit later. And there's, according to that, trade effluent not applicable. It'll be a most unusual development, industrial development, if there isn't some sort of trade effluent, I would have thought, looking at various other sites we've got. And so I'd like officers' comments on that, really. It specifically pulls out of Anglia Water Services.
Well, one thing at a time. There are conditions for. There's a foul drainage strategy that's condition 23, and that was a recommendation from the County Council SUDS team, together with the normal drainage strategy conditions as well. They were the County Council was satisfied subject to that condition. It was noted that the intention being, because that is the way this model of development works, is that there isn't, particularly if it's office, primarily office and very light industrial use, that there wasn't a need for water drainage and supplies and foul drainage from individual units at the back part of the site, but that it would be centralised. The foul drainage strategy is quite onerous and picks up all of the aspects of drainage that you might that might be relevant. I mean, both in terms of oversight drainage and foul drainage.
Right. Councillor Everett.
Thank you. I have a question about the trees. It says in 6.2, a row of mature deciduous trees subject to a TPO lie on the soil, etc. Can you tell me, please, exactly what the TPO actually says regarding those trees, so that we can get a feeling as to why they were TPO'd in the first place, and then subsequently, once we looked at that, give a comment on amenity of that?
I haven't got a copy of the TPO. I suspect it was imposed at the time either of the last outline consent for the similar form of development in order to protect them. It may have gone back longer to at some stage when the site was being used more actively for as a golf driving range, although one would sort of sense that wasn't a prerequisite of that form of use, although it may well have been a concern in case there was a temptation to fell the trees to facilitate the golf driving experience. But I suspect it had more to do with the the previous outline. In terms of the TPO, it was obviously the trees are by and large mature, fine mature specimens, and whether or not in the sort of original landscape there was more to it than that. I mean, to my mind, they sort of looked as though they'd formed a boundary, possibly an old hedgerow boundary, the hedgerow having long gone. The tree officer is quite adamant that as far as possible it should be retained, but is happy with the scheme that's before him and before us, to retain all but one of the good ones and take out one that was of less benefit. And that decision, I think, or that recommendation from him is being reinforced by the opportunity to create more landscaping within the site that, with the passage of time, will and obviously depending on specification, will enhance the area more than and fully compensate for the loss of one particular oak tree.
Yes, Councillor Everett.
Thank you for that. I'm a politician, I don't believe people. So I always check. And I go back to other bits of information. And the fact that we haven't got the TPO and do not know what it says, and we are planning to axe a tree that is actually subject to a TPO, concerns me. And I'm not saying that there's anything untoward about that, it's just that I like to look and see what was previously said so that I can make a verification on what then subsequently happens. It does concern me that we don't have that information. So if you can find that information out with the information you have with you today in your box, I would appreciate it.
I don't know. No, I'm afraid I can't produce that. Sorry, I'm afraid I can't produce that. Yes. I mean, from our perspective, it tends to sort of fall back on the advice received from specialist in-house officers, which has been the case here. And I'm sure the tree officer was gave it every consideration necessary, and as set out in his recommendations, first in the report and then in the following on from observations and concerns expressed at the site visit, he came back to us and, as mentioned, his further comments are in the update.
Graham, if I can help, I understand Councillor Bennison has probably got a copy of the TPOs.
At the bottom of page 36, it says, although the development of the land would necessitate the removal of 2 trees covered by TPOs, and then it goes on to say the removal of the 3rd small oak and a section of the hedgerow to allow access. So it's 3 trees and some hedging.
Right. Oh, you haven't got the TPOs with you. Sorry, I misunderstood you. Yeah.
3 trees, not 1.
Yes. Right. I must admit, when we've got it on the pictures, the one tree that does worry me is the big one, which we were alongside. I think that's a magnificent specimen, and I'd be sorry to see that one particular go. It'll be years before any replacement ones get anything like that height. I don't know, Greg, can you bring the picture up? Yeah.
I was looking for the...
That's the one, that one there. We've been asked to lift TPOs many times before, and we've largely agreed with the officer because we've seen some decay or split trees, but that one to me looks to be in very healthy conditions. Further points? It's such a pity that those smaller units somehow couldn't have been arranged just to keep that, at least that one. Yes, is it the bottom?
Yeah, we've got that's a tree plan. So the tree that you're concerned about, the main one is that this one here, which is right in the middle of these units and the sort of access arrangements to it. So it would, to retain that as well, would be a fairly fundamental redesign of not the site but that area. I think there's the other tree that's coming out is a smaller one up here. And I think reference to hedgerows coming out is to the conifer hedge, which in fact the tree officer would have rather took the whole run of hedging out, which is along the old Ipswich Road boundary. That's the reference to hedges.
Yeah, I rather agree with him about that hedge. It's past its best or its sell-by date now, I think, but it still does give us a boundary and will mask any noise or some of the noise coming through. Right, further questions, people? In that case, if you've got no further questions, do I have any proposals? Right.
Chairman, I'm in agreement, I think, with Councillor Everett about that lovely tree. Not that I know a lot about trees, but that did look very, very spectacular. Can I just ask, obviously it's on the left-hand side of that plan, as I'm looking at it. It's probably right in the middle of the top block. The gap, what is the gap between the bottom of those units and the next ones? As in, can they be brought down so the tree could possibly remain, if that makes sense? Thank you.
The tree location, I believe, is more or less on the line of these units. It's somewhere in there. So if it were to be retained, you'd be retaining the root area, which is probably quite significant, and the canopy. So it's probably quite an extensive area. You would probably, I'd be guessing here, but I think you'd be losing about probably about 10 of those units.
Councillor Everett?
Certainly when we've had situations like this before, we have been able to say to officers and developers, look, we think that a redesign here could make this acceptable. And I don't see any reason not to do that here. Architects are clever people. They can redesign it to get the same number of units in a slightly different way to accommodate the tree. It isn't rocket science. It is actually just a case of trying to build around it or design around the problems that one has. That is what an architect is for. So I'd like to propose exactly that perhaps this should be deferred for discussions with the developer as to how they can retain that tree.
I'll second that.
Right. Our officer has just said it might mean taking 10 of these units out. It's a job until we see it on there. Actually, how many? That would be 10 out of 91. I don't believe it would be as many as that, but nevertheless, when you've got 91 units there, it's it would see. It's worth a try to see whether we can save it. I think that's what I would like to say. So, Right. Councillor Baker?
Thank you, Chairman. I think the discussion has to be had. I think we're all in agreement that the tree needs to stay. And then if the discussion is going to be had between officers and the developer and it's decided and come to the conclusion that it can't be done, then it will come back in front of this committee for further determination. Thank you. And I'll support the proposal. Thank you.
Right. Well, nobody wishes to add anything, take anything further away. Head of Planning.
Thanks, Chair. Just to be clear that would be the single reason for deferring it, and that's what you're not asking officers to negotiate on any other point with the scheme.
My gut feeling is that the principle, as outlined there, would seem to fit everybody's. They accept it. It is this one tree that is the principal subject of discussion.
No.
Yep.
Sorry, just to clarify that there's sort of murmurings going on about the trees. Is it the one tree? Because there's three with TPOs on it, yes, but obviously they're in very different parts of that layout, so you're going to be asking for quite different things. So is it the one tree that you've been talking about over on the left-hand side at the bottom units, or did you want a discussion about all three of them? Because I think that's probably going to be quite a different discussion.
Ask the proposer. Does the proposer want? Yep.
Could I just add that the other tree that was the main tree that was coming out was a small example. It was in the row of trees. So whether it came out or not isn't fundamental to the application. The one that you wish to retain, the prominent one, is the only one that is really affected by development.
Yep. That's my understanding. It is the understanding of the proposer and the seconder. Do you wish to speak on that?
Just confirm, because we did say 3 trees, and I believe the third one is possibly in the hedge right at the top there. Is that because it mentions access to the site? In the report, anyway.
We parked initially on a site visit. We parked by that gate. My recollection was that they were fir trees either side rather than an oak. I would guess that it might be in the main sprig of trees, as far as I'm concerned, I think the proposer means the one that we've seen the pictures of. That's the one that worries him.
That's the major one of concern.
Yeah.
I would be happy to go just with the one tree, but if others feel that it is necessary to look at the other TPO tree as well, then include that. I personally think it's only the one, but happy to go with whatever my seconder feels.
The reference to 3 trees, what the tree officer says is that the development proposal also necessitates the removal of 2 smaller oak trees. These are T9 of the tree report and another oak on the boundary with the highway. So the T9 trees are the protected trees, the one of which, in his professional opinion, is either too small or too insignificant or diseased to warrant protection. The other one of those 2 is the one you're concerned about. The third tree, another oak on the boundary, I doubt very much that forms part of the TPO for the site.
I'm okay with that, because
Principal
it is
tree,
the
then,
TPO the important part of that, and that magnificent tree.
So you know what you're voting on now. We're deferring the decision for officers to go back and talk purely about this one big tree that we all saw, but generally, in principle, we've got no problems with the site as such. Right, those in favour of the deferment, please show. Right, thank you. And those against? One. And that is one abstention. One abstention, right. Okay, so thank you for that. And by my reckoning, I have before I close the meeting.
Can I just mention something, Chair, before we do close the meeting? And I don't know how other members actually feel here. I found this meeting particularly difficult, and I'm assuming it's been very difficult for our officers as well. But I believe that some of my problems were the fact that we did the site visits last week, didn't have all the paperwork in front of us at the time like we normally do. We've normally had a quick skim through. We know what's going to be in the reports. We understand that. We have the opportunity to ask our officer who's there, who's very obliging, helps us as much as possible, then bring anything forward at the meeting. Now, that's not what's happened for tonight's meeting. And I do wonder if some of the problem that we've actually had is because we didn't follow our normal way of working. I'm a creature of habit, unfortunately. And if those that know me know very well that I am a creature of habit. And that's why I found it difficult. And I just wonder if other members may have felt the same. That's just a comment I felt I'd like to make.
I can add a bit of that because it was ultimately my decision to split the large number of applications we had over 2 nights. And it meant that our office didn't manage to get the agendas out before we had, for tonight's meeting, before the site visit. So it was a mixture. It was not ideal, and to be quite honest, when I considered can we get all the site visits in one, it did save us all giving up another meeting and hiring another bus for the second time. And I thought if we can get them all in, let's do so. So I'll carry 90% of the blame, but I agree in principle with what you said. It wasn't helpful when we did the site visit not to have these papers in front of us. Yes, please.
I'd like to put my 2 pennyworth in and agree entirely with Councillor McWilliams. That's why I said earlier I'm finding the application confusing. First and foremost, we went on those site visits and then we received an agenda which we were told ignore that agenda and go on to another one which we have before us now. Well, and I know everybody on this committee, once they get an agenda, they just have to read it in full. Well, I do anyway. I read that agenda and finding all these facts and figures before it was a little confusing. And I could have done with a wee bit more information than that. And that's the reason I said I was confused about the applications. I didn't fully understand what was going on before me. And I think that we need to be careful of that. We could arrive at the wrong decisions.
Right. Point taken. Yes, Councillor Fowler.
Just in case you can't hear me. The thought did go through my mind as well about how unfair the amended arrangement was, not just to everybody around this table, but mainly to the applicants, because of the information that we perhaps didn't all have, or some we didn't have on time, or we could flick through, or bedtime reading, however we choose to do it. So perhaps we should take you out to the bike sheds later and beat you up, John.
That is being
Yes.
In the chairman's defence, and I have to. Yes, it was difficult, but when we actually got the original agenda, or what was going to be on, there were another 2 items, one which we deferred at the last meeting before it came here, and there was another quite large application that the officers had potentially put on. So we would have been sitting until midnight if we'd have done it all in one day, which isn't good for anybody. So, there you go. My two pennyworth. And you're not.
Yeah, I think, heaven forbid, but if it does happen again, I think we publish all the papers together. Ian's office has been greatly under stress at the present moment, hence one of the reasons we have Debbie here this evening. When there's 3 in the office and 2 of them are sick, it does put the strain on the office. But no, we'll learn from this, and if we get another giant agenda, then we'll have to make sure that we get the papers out for everybody. Right, thank you all very much, and it's 8:15, 8:20, right. Thank you.